Rabbi, with permission, fellow members and guests, I wonder if anybody has ever had the experience of being asked by a non-Jew the following question: what do Jews believe? Or what do Jews have to believe? Or even, do you have anything like a creed, a set of beliefs where you say, I believe this and I believe that, which you teach your children to recite by heart and give them rewards for doing so? I think that most of us, when faced with such questions, would reply with a certain degree of uncertainty and say, no, we don't exactly have a creed. We might even go as far as saying we don't even have a theology, just a way of life. Now, we certainly have a way of life, but it isn't quite true to say that we do not have a theology or beliefs. Indeed, our most famous theologian, the 12th century Maimonides, Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, born in Spain, living in Egypt, composed a creed precisely because he thought it was necessary. It's called the 13 Principles, Shelosha Asa Ikarim, and it consists of 13 propositions, which I suppose today we may or may not accept or believe. In fact, the 13 principles were heavily contested by later scholars, and they have become almost, I would say, a basis for discussion about Jewish belief rather than a creed in themselves. If you're interested, I think that the most approachable, accessible discussion is Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs's Principles of the Jewish Faith, which you'll certainly find in the library. There is a metrical recasting of the 13 principles, which is actually in our book. If you have the Siddur, it's on page 526. We call it Yigdal from its first word, and it is sung by Jewish communities on the eve of Shabbat and festivals. I know in the LGS here it is sung on Kol Nidre on the eve of Yom Kippur. And I will be returning very briefly to that. Well, how far does it take us? Do we or don't we have a creed, a statement of belief? Do we have nothing to say about the divine? Not so. Every Jewish community, including ourselves, sings one, as we are going to do presently. And you all know it. It is called Adon Olam. I did once say from this position here, hardly, it's not really a pulpit, is it? It's desk, that Adon Olam has become a sort of cheery signing off piece of music, a sing-song at the end of the service, rather than the gem, I call it a gem of a Jewish creed. But I think we should look at it and perhaps examine it and see whether we can draw any conclusions about it. Could it be a creed? I'm sure you know Adon Olam by heart, but just in case you don't, if you have the book, it's on page, I think it's out, yes, it's up on the wall. It's also in your book on 525 or 526. Adon Olam divides very clearly into two sections. And the first is an attempt to describe the divine as seen by the Jewish philosophers and theologians of the Middle Ages. And in Adon Olam, we have three statements of this nature. The first is the eternity of the divine. And so we have on the, I think it's the fourth line, Vehu Haya, Vehu Hoveh, Vehu Yehieh. He was, is, and ever will be. And on the sixth line, we have the words Beli Reshit, Beli Tachlit, without beginning and without an end. And then on another line, there are two very abstract ideas. V'hu echad ve'en sheni lahamshil lo is what we sing. The more difficult of them, I think, is the first one. V'hu echad. You may say, that's not difficult. We're all monotheists, aren't we? There is only one divine entity. But if you look at Yigdal, the recast and simpler form of Maimonides' 13 Principles, and you look at its second line, it's puzzling because it says, Echad ve'en yachid kayichudo. He is one and there is no, and the translators have a field day here, but what it actually means is there is no oneness, if there were such a word in English, like his oneness. What is oneness? It puzzled me for years. But if you go back to the original 13 Principles of Maimonides, and I think it's the second principle, he explains that this means that the divine is different from everything else because it was not composed, put together, perhaps from atoms. It does not have constituent parts, and therefore it cannot be divided. Even more astonishing is that the Rambam's proof of this, taken from Torah, is something which we all know and we have already said today, and we say it twice a day. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, one and indivisible. And the third abstract attempt to say something about the divine in Adon Olam is the second part of that line, Ein Sheni Lahamshilo. There is no second to use as a mashal, Lahamshil, an example. And this reflects the idea that we understand things by their comparison with others, or by their belonging to a class or category of things. To use a very crude example, if I tap this and I say, this is of a certain size, a medium size, I mean it is of the same size as other things that we think of being medium. If I say it's made of wood, likewise, it is like other things are made of wood. But the divine has no mashal, and therefore it cannot be compared because it doesn't belong to any category. Now, a bright child will say, this is not true. For Adon Olam itself says in its very first line, Adon Olam Asher Malach, Lord of the universe, who reigned like a melech, like a king. And of course, we refer to the divine in human terminology as a king or as a father. But we are warned by the Rambam himself and many others, many very familiar places, particularly in his great theological work, The Guide for the Perplexed, that anything which is written in the Torah about the divine, be it a noun, a verb, saw, said, was angry, a pronoun, he, has to be understood figuratively. Because, and here the Rambam gives us a well-known quotation, the Torah spoke in the language of human beings. Torah dibra bilshon bnei Adam. Of course it did. What other language could it speak? Well, this leaves us, I suppose, up in the air. It's a very challenging attempt to say something about the divine. And then Adon Olam subtly changes without so much as a phrase such as B'chol Zot, nevertheless. It changes its tone completely. We now hear over and over again one sound, I. V'hu Eli. V'hu Garali. Tzur Chevli. V'hu Nisi. He is my banner. Manos li. He is a manos. He is a shelter. The sound I at the end of the prefix means my. So here we have a personal God, one to whom we have access and with whom we can communicate, and not that remote, inaccessible, indivisible, and incomparable one of the first part of Adon Olam, the philosopher's God, as that entity has been described. Well, the question is still not answered. Is Adon Olam a creed, or can it be used as a creed, statement of belief? Well, it doesn't say I believe, and it expresses a contradiction. It is not simple to grasp, and of course it would be absurd to expect children to learn it as a creed. Well, what are we to do? And the answer of the scholars of Judaism, our scholars and sages, is that we should do two things. The first is to try, if we want to understand or to approach and attempt to understand the divine through its manifestation in the creation, in the world in which we live. I thought of that just before, as we were standing reading the Amidah, and there's two little phrases which we may not think about very much. Mashiv haruach umorid hageshem, causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Indeed, one of the great achievements of the Rambam was to reconcile the Torah, to make the Torah agree with what was known by medieval scholars, or what was thought to be known by medieval scholars about the universe, or the cosmos of the time, in which the earth was in the middle and planets circled around it. My teacher, one of my teachers, Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs, used to say, it's not so much what the Rambam wrote then, but what such a towering intellect would have said today in a post-Newtonic universe. And the other approach to trying to understand the divine would be, if we now return to that well-intentioned non-Jewish person who asked us, what do Jews believe? Well, perhaps we should reply, we believe that we have received commandments to live in a certain way, to observe the mitzvot. That's what it means. And the nearest then, if that is so, that we have to a creed, is possibly the Shema. For we do teach it to our children. In fact, it says, you shall teach it to your children. V'shinantam levanecha. And we do obey the commandments, as we are, in fact, doing here today, because this is Shabbat, and very soon we shall be making Kiddush, which is saying something, to express that Shabbat is different, is special from other days, and that Bnei Yisrael v'shamaru. That's why I go on about pronouncing it in that way, because it is in the future and it is also a command. And Bnei Yisrael v'shamaru Bnei Yisrael, they shall obey, they shall guard, they shall preserve Shabbat. And there we shall be wishing each other joyfully, as I wish you now, Shabbat Shalom.